obviously the title of the webinar today is Forging New Practice, which just trying to think first of all how we obviously approach this topic, quite wide. So I thought I'd give you a bit of background about us and then about myself, about where I've come from part one through to obviously starting the practice now. And like Josh said, along the way, obviously Copenhagen and London as well. So that's myself on the left and then Ashley Taylor on the right. So we set the practice up in 2017 when we were actually in Copenhagen. At the time, obviously, I was working for Schmidt Hammerlassen, one of Denmark's two largest practices. We knew we were over in Copenhagen for a certain amount of time. It wasn't for the rest of our lives, but we initially moved over there for a life experience, mainly focused on understanding what we believe in kind of Danish design and building on that interest of Scandinavian design principles. Whilst we were at Schmidt Hammerlassen, what I'd like to do is basically set the practice up to start working on kind of RIBA competitions, just so that we could stay reconnected or with obviously the UK, and hopefully use that as a platform to when we move back to the UK to potentially have the chance to build something bigger. Just a little bit of a blur about us on the right hand side. So one thing we are very interested on is how we can extract core values from different projects. I'll come on to that later, but it's really about tackling each project, no matter what sector, what size, to basically find those core values that we can then design from. Sounds very simple, but it's those kind of things where we can then create user design principle, kind of focused schemes. And yeah, it's something that we've basically gone from the start, really. So obviously Copenhagen now in Manchester, I think Manchester and Copenhagen share quite a lot of similarities in the way the cities are, but then also Manchester is trying to base itself on what Copenhagen's about at the moment as well, with whole new cycling initiatives coming into it. So I think there's great opportunities in both cities to learn about different types of placemaking and design, and that's something that we're trying to do this very day. So this is basically a motto that we have in our office, and we like to celebrate functionality, simplicity and clean lines. We focus on the application of Scandinavian and lifestyle principles. The word on the right is hygge. It's something that we picked up when we were in Denmark. So it's called the art of coziness, but it's also a lifestyle that they live. It's about how they do everyday activities to their fullest, and they enjoy everything that they do, from their work-life balance, which is incredible, through to obviously their everyday family time. So what we'd like to do is, from our interest in Denmark, this is the motto that we've taken on as we've set the practice up, and our ethos is to basically design to our Scandinavian influence and try and bring that to the UK market. The picture there is one of the large projects we're working on at the moment. It's a large 1,100 square metre house in Berkshire called Viners. It's a 6-bedroom property situated across 5 different interconnected buildings, single-storey buildings on either side of these 2 principal barns. The single-storey buildings are kind of main family and activity spaces, whilst the black kind of Berkshire vernacular barns are formal dining, living, wine room, bedrooms, library. Very interesting project, ongoing, hopefully be on site at the end of October this year. So for us, this is a very, very large project in the office at the moment. So a little bit about the beginning of where I started and then up to where I am now. So Joshua and I actually met at university at Liverpool John Moores. After that, during part 1, we actually came out during a recession. Obviously something that some people could relate to now, but I was fortunate to find a placement at a really small startup practice in Basingstoke. Started in a director's garage, 3 directors, myself and 1 architect. We quickly went to 8 people within my first placement year, working on a series of private residential projects, one-off houses in Winchester, and then also moved into education work at that time as well. After that, went back to uni, did my masters again at John Moores in Liverpool, came back as a part 2. Then I basically took a part 3 and then became a lead architect there. During that time, I actually led up the education sector, delivering a series of projects across kind of the peripheral colleges across London. So John Ruskin College in Croydon, Redbridge College, and then just before I left for Copenhagen, I was working on Barnet and Southgate. But with that as well, there was also a mix of large-scale residential work, most notably a scheme we worked on called Alpine House in Wembley. So that was there for a very long time, very settled, loved what I did every day. However, there was a point where part of us always thought that we needed to experience something different, and Danish design was always a part of what I liked to design to, what I believed in. So we thought that rather than everyone doing their trip to Australia or New Zealand, we thought, why don't we try Copenhagen out and see if we can actually use the time away from the UK to actually also kind of develop as an architect. So we moved to Copenhagen, a very difficult decision because, like I said, I loved the previous job. And I was fortunate to get a project architect role at Schmidt Hammerlassen Architects. During that time, I was actually working on a redevelopment of Detroit in America, which it consisted of 2.5 million square foot of office space, 500 apartments, and the redevelopment of a national theatre, grade 2 listed over there. Basically took it from concept design through to stage 4 effectively, but then obviously departed Copenhagen just before they broke ground. I think the biggest thing for me over in Denmark was not just about learning new ways of working, but also in learning new ways of kind of work-life balance. Whilst I was in London and Basingstoke, it was, let's just say, I like to work long hours. When I went to Copenhagen, it was completely different. So Denmark was purely 35-hour working week. On Fridays, we would finish at 3 o'clock. And it was all about efficiency. So being as efficient as you can within that certain time frame to try and avoid working long hours. Quite difficult when you're working in America, because America in general, we were having to sometimes cater to American time. Consultants were in London as well, so we'd always be flying over to London probably every 3 weeks. So during that time, we had to manage those expectations. Got to a point 2 years in where Brexit was on the horizon, but we decided personal reasons to basically move back to the UK. Ashley, my partner in business, is also my fiance. So what we decided to do was move back to the UK to obviously start family life. And that took us to Manchester. So Manchester, we knew at the time, was thriving in architecture in terms of residential development, but also very close to Liverpool, but also very close to my family down in Oxford. So we set up in Manchester, didn't know anybody at the time. And so one thing that always worked with me is how can we move to a new area, not knowing anyone, but start to practice successfully. I'm not sure if anyone's seen this, but this is an extract from Abstract on Netflix. It's the episode with Bjarke Ingels where he talks about how he founded Big. And one thing that stuck with me on that program was always the phrase, which was, nobody will trust you have built a building unless you've already built a building. And it always stuck with me, because how can someone expect you to start a practice without having that past track record that you've built a building yourself? One thing we've actually tried to do is always go with our own initiative and not rely on kind of build portfolio from past employment. However, one thing we have done, which is what I took from this, is how can we actually build upon past relationships? Because part of one of my strong beliefs is not what you know, it's who you know. And I think that was quite big. So this is, I took an exercise when putting this presentation together to look at basically how we grew from year 1 to year 2 to now we're entering our third year. And I found this a really interesting diagram, actually. So like I said, it was all about kind of past relationships. So moved to Manchester, not knowing anyone. I still had a very, very good relationship with my old directors at Altrincham and Gaunt. They're growing considerably now. They've just broken into the AJ top 100s. At the time I left, they were 26 staff. They're now, I think, close to 50. But when I moved back, just through some initial discussions with my directors, they were basically very kind, and they provided me a series of project leads. So at the top there, you'll see 3 projects that we were basically handed the opportunity to work on in Hampshire. But then with that is, I think when starting the practice, one big thing is always about earning your wage effectively, and how can you sustain an income when trying to start a business. So not only did we obtain some projects through Altrincham, but I also undertook 2 to 3 days a week project consultancy for them for 6 months. What that allowed me to do is personally keep kind of personal income coming in, whilst I could then spend pretty much the rest of the time in the week growing the practice. Moving to Manchester, like I said, very difficult to self-generate leads when no one actually knows who you are. So we secured the 3 projects for Altrincham and Gorn, but then also within the first year, we managed to secure 3 more projects. One of them I'll touch back up on a minute, which was the large house at Viners. But the other 2 were, one was in Manchester through various internet channels. I think one was through House, and then the other was just through word of mouth from one of the other projects we're working on. So Altrincham and Gorn for me were a huge relationship to build upon, because it allowed us to found the practice, to stabilise ourselves in Manchester, and also keep that kind of personal income coming in whilst trying to grow the business. But then also Schmidt Hammerlassen, looking back at our time in Denmark, we use that as the influence to establish our practice values. So what do we believe in? What are our core strengths? How can we take the kind of Danish style of design and the Scandinavian principles and bring that into our own ethos? One big thing over there as well, which I thoroughly enjoyed, was understand the true sense of collaboration. It's a word which everyone kind of always throws around. But one thing that Schmidt Hammerlassen and Danish practices did very well is they would always try and encourage collaboration between small and medium practices, and often large practices working alongside small practices on a series of competitions, because what they believed in, it wasn't about who could be better than someone else. It was about how can we make the architectural profession in Denmark stronger, because if they become stronger as a profession, then that actually values the profession in general, and it's something I still believe today. So like I said, year 1 was all about, for us, about maintaining these key relationships, be it in Copenhagen or down south. So what's our key lessons we learned? Kind of self-generated leads were more difficult to obtain when moving country to a city with no connections. So a lot of our projects that you'll see on our website and in our portfolios, they are predominantly down south, still are to this day, but we are growing more and more work up north. Strong relationships with previous practices provided significant leads, which are well suited to a small practice. A project consultancy provided financial stability, and then our Danish connection maintained through forming our design ethos. So this is a quick one, just showing one of the projects that we completed in year 1. This is the lodge in Berkshire. It was a 200 square metre self-build guest lodge. This was the project that preceded the main house at Viners, which I showed you a second ago. It was a self-build project, which basically we worked closely alongside the client to provide a series of technical kind of leadership along the way, broke down packages so that they could basically take it to their friends and family. And then we followed it closely along the way that was being completed. It was only completed 2 months ago due to kind of ground conditions over the winter. But for us, this was it's a great kind of starting point for us as a practice. 2 other projects that we're working on in that time. These are 2 in Basingstoke. The top one is called Clidston Road, which was a Japanese courtyard inspired project. Client came to us with a brief of purely just asking us to extend their kitchen with a utility room. They didn't know what they wanted. The existing kitchen was kind of a 1970s addition to the existing Victorian property. And we just kind of, what we do on all our design projects is we take a step back at the start of each project and we say, what does the client want, but also what could they have? And basically we came up with this idea of a Japanese courtyard and how these can connect different spaces. So at the back you've got a kitchen, left hand side you've got a dining room, and then on the left, far left, you've got a living room, and basically you maintain these vantage points to the front of the property, which is quite a large kind of green kind of hedgerow kind of lovely landscaped area. So we thought a Japanese courtyard would be a kind of beautiful kind of addition to that project. And then the bottom one, it's a CrossFit and gym and sauna. Again in Basingstoke, but it's basically the replacement of an existing garage to create this lovely kind of annex building onto their existing pool. That's just received planning last week, so we'll be looking to take that on site at the end of summer this year. But I think, like, you can see there's kind of similar design kind of manifestos coming through here, the kind of the rationale, the symmetry, the nice kind of symmetrical proportions, and that's something obviously that we'd like to translate through each of our projects. So this is one thing that obviously we'd like to just touch upon. It's let's deliver what the client wants and what are they also not expecting. I think that's the big thing for us. You know, clients often come to you with a mindset of what do we want, but for us, we want to establish ourselves as a practice quite quickly. And I think to do that, we need to sometimes think outside the box. So it's extracting those values that the client really wants, but then also try and go the extra mile. And I think that's what obviously design is in general. So then this is year 2. So for relationships in year 2, so year 1 was obviously about building those relationships and playing to our strengths from obviously our past, but then carried out the quick analysis of basically how can we maintain these connections. So this is what year 2 looks like. So as we began to build momentum through self-generated projects, you can see it over doubled in that time. One thing I wanted to do was also not just return the favour of Airchamber and Gaunt, but obviously also show that I still want to continue that true sense of collaboration. So we actually invited Airchamber and Gaunt to become a client advisor in one of the projects that we're working on, but then also, which you'll see later on, provide some additional resource for us as we're now entering some critical stages on that project. But I think what this basically shows is we can now start to become our own kind of entity. So we've now got, I think, 16 ongoing projects in the office. Some of those starting to generate their own leads. So DF24, bottom right, that's actually Altrincham, which I'll touch up on in a minute. But even since November, since starting that project, we've generated 1 lead through there, which has now generated itself into 2 more, just purely through the connections that we've met on those projects. But like I said, it's all about continuing that involvement with other practices along the way. And I think then at the bottom, showing kind of Schmidt Hammerlassen kind of blurred out now. I think it's because we've now defined what we want to do as our practice ethos and what our kind of social and practice values are as a company. So I think it's now that we've got that kind of strong base, we can now move it forward to hopefully create some really interesting architectural schemes. So what are our new challenges? New challenges, obviously, first year was about establishing the practice, second year was about kind of building the momentum. Now we're into our 3rd year. It's kind of where do we go from here? So one thing that's starting to creep up on us a lot is obviously understand your worth. Something that I strongly believe in again. It's a lesson that I've learned along the way, which obviously we're still learning to this day. And it comes down to obviously fees. It comes down to gauging the right clients that you want to work with. But this was a critical slide that I kind of came across, which I'm not sure if anyone's seen it, but the Business of Architecture podcast. It's where Rion Willard basically interviews a series of different architects talking about different challenges that we face. And one of them that I believed at the start was, why are architects facing fees that are so low? And actually, I think everyone, from my opinion, needs to understand what their worth is, and they need to stand firm. And it doesn't matter if it's in architecture, it's in any industry. We've turned away, well, not only have we just turned away, but we also not pursued some projects that we were approached for because it just wasn't right for us. One thing I recognised in our first year of practice was we could take on so many small lean-to extensions, so many projects which we could just kind of turn around into a quick bit of kind of fee earning. But for us, those projects wouldn't allow us to create a strong portfolio, which would then hopefully then produce the following leads and then the kind of the basis to start the practice from in years 2, 3, 4, and 5. And I think that's one thing I've really learned is time is really precious. So if it took on too many small projects, I wouldn't be able to dedicate the amount of time to those projects. And then obviously wouldn't be able to provide the high quality project we try to always deliver. But then also it wouldn't allow us to take on the projects that actually mean a lot to us and then really focus on delivering that high level of detail. So for anyone that hasn't seen this podcast, I'd strongly advise that you do. So obviously one of them was understanding your worth. Next one was building a network. I think you can see from the last 10 minutes I do like to talk. Building a network was, for me, moving to Manchester, not knowing anybody. How do you build a business if you don't know anyone? Very difficult to. So one thing we did was a lot of networking within the first 18 months. Still doing it now, but I think now we've understood the channels that we want to kind of focus on and the groups that we want to focus on, kind of networking. So obviously it's working 9 till 6, but it's 9 till whenever, or 7 in the morning till whenever, but it's also knowing when to network as well. So this is a networking event that was set up by someone called Fragstein Studio in Manchester, and it's about bringing the built environment together. These sessions happen at 7 o'clock in the morning once a month. Then they also chair small round tables once every fortnight. But again, it's a brilliant way to meet not only new architects, but also other expertise within the built environment within Manchester with a very local kind of mindset at heart. So the idea is to hopefully build these connections, which will then generate into potential leads in 18 months' time. One thing I do, obviously one thing is going in with a lead or going in with the kind of mindset that you're going to create, get a project from going to speak to someone, but that's not, for me, that's not the case. I genuinely believe that each lead will take about 18 months to flourish into a project. The ones that come along really quickly that don't, fantastic, take those while you can, but if not, they're often slow burners, I've found. But I think these are a great way because as we're trying to develop ourselves and establish ourselves in Manchester, where actually there's a lot of architects in general, ranging from Ian Simpson or Simpson Hoff to 5 Plus to Artform, who are a smaller commodity, to us, which are on a kind of similar scale. 6'2" architects, obviously Nick Moss is running for our IBA president at the moment. There is so much competition, so I think it's so important to obviously familiarise yourself with the people around you, but then also stay true to who you are. So obviously building a network. The next one then for me was growth and resource. So for the first 6 months in practice, it was purely myself, whilst Ashley was off doing some other project consultancy. We thought moving back to a city, it wasn't the most sensible thing to both try and start the practice together, just for kind of personal lifestyle balance. So growth and resource, how do you grow and when is the right time to grow? Because it's kind of that kind of 1 + 1 = 3 mentality, where you need to find the right people early, or you have the opportunity to find the right people to come on board who share the same passion on a smaller entity and smaller kind of, build the practice to then, kind of let you kind of grow really. Because if you don't grow, you kind of flatline, in my opinion. And obviously it comes obviously a risk. Taking staff on is a big financial risk, I felt personally, as a young practice. It's kind of making sure you have all the correct procedures in place. We moved to an office relatively quickly rather than working out of co-working. So for us, it was how do you grow? So obviously this is Viners again, a project to this scale, and then obviously trying to business develop and generate new leads as well. It just wasn't sustainable for myself to work on this. And then we've also got, so Charlotte's been working for us now for 18 months. She leads a lot of the small projects as a part 2 architecture is just about to sit a part 3 exam. So we've got kind of Charlotte and I work on smaller projects, with myself leading this one as well. And then we've also now got a senior architect for the last 4 or 5 months who is consulting on this project. And then with Ashley now coming on board as well over the last 6 months. So we've quickly grown from 2 to 4 people. And then hopefully within the next 6 to 12 months, we'll be looking to go from hopefully up to kind of between 5 and 10, depending on the success of kind of Altrincham and other projects. So what this allowed us to do is basically know who we want to bring in at what time. It's about the expertise. So we identified that we needed a senior kind of technical-led architect to help us deliver this project effectively and efficiently as well. So using their time well to really push on with groundwork packages, etc., so that we can get this project moving along very, very quickly. Like I said, it's supposed to be due on site at the end of October this year, so very quick turnaround. We were granted planning permission in March this year, so yeah, bits of very exciting times at the moment, to be honest. So with that kind of growth and resource, kind of took a step back and looked at our practice structure. So you see us in the middle here, myself, Ashley and Charlotte, but then one thing again picked up from Copenhagen is where can we use people's expertise, and is that outsourced as well? So one thing I was really keen on within the first 2 years, and especially now with all COVID-19 and kind of lockdown uncertainty in certain markets, was how can we keep our entity small, cost effective, and actually run on very kind of low overheads at the moment. So what we do, we tend to kind of work out what's more time effective. Is it us to do in-house visuals, or is it to kind of, you know, approach a CGI visualizer that we know very well to basically undertake those tasks for us, whilst we can then focus our time on other larger projects. Airchain and Gaunt again are involved, where we've got their ongoing support on one of the projects that we're working on, but also that we've obviously subcontracted a senior technical architect from them at the moment, with hopefully a few more in the future. But then also artists. So in Copenhagen, we work with a lot of artists at Smith Hamlassen, and that's something I'd like to continue doing, not just keeping it within the architectural field, but moving further afield, where again, everyone has an expertise. The flat graphic that was on the extension advertisement, that was actually done by an external CGI visualizer, an external flat graphic artist that we knew quite well. She's starting to try and establish her own practice in that kind of field as well. So we thought that was a lovely opportunity to actually work together, where 2 small practices can combine to achieve a wider goal. But then also, I think the practice structure also comes down to your consultants. So down the bottom right there is the south of Manchester. Like I said, a lot of our work is still down south with my previous connections. So I'd say 75% of our work is currently between Oxford, Berkshire and Hampshire. So what we're trying to do is grow a pool of, or establish a pool of other consultants that we understand how we work well together. For me, what that allows us to do is not have to travel down south as much. So now I can focus more time working up north in the office, working on actual project work rather than traveling. But then obviously Manchester, that provides us the opportunity to kind of create a wider network because we're so local. So we're currently on a bid document, for example, on a project which everybody is within a 5-minute walk from us, which hopefully then provides an opportunity on that project where we can create a very strong design team. So additional new challenges. The next one was new sectors. So as a young practice, I think I could probably relate to a lot of others where it predominantly starts on private residential work. Private residential work on small scales as well. So private house extensions range from say 50 to 200,000 pounds. How do we move into new sectors? When again, going back to that B.R. Kingall's quote, no one believes you built something till you built something. I think last year we were quite fortunate where we had kind of 2 leads on that really. One being Meze Street Food. So Meze Street Food is in Hatch in Manchester. Hatch is almost like Box Park Brixton in London. it's a series of small kind of street food vendors, ranging from small courtyard schemes through to larger units. And we would provide the opportunity to basically carry out a small interiors project for Meze, very small budget, very quick time frame, but a family-run business. And we kind of shared their story, and we really understood what their passion was to, you know, create this business. And we saw it as an opportunity that we could potentially move into this kind of hospitality market, but also kind of recreational projects in different ways. So this was a really quick project, but I think one exciting thing about this is, as it was a small project, we also had the opportunity to experiment still. I think as a small practice, it's really nice to still take every project and try and experiment with something different. So for example, this one was all about how we could utilise a material that's cost effective in a certain sheet size till its fullest. And this, in this instance, it was chipboard. So like you can see on the image on the right, it's quite a raw material, but when you mix it with the right kind of signage, in my opinion, and the right colour palette and the right soft finishes and the planting and the menu colours, that's where you can really kind of bring all these kind of larger ideas together. But one thing that we also identified was, with a quick project time frame, it also allowed us to create a very a built project realised in our portfolio very quickly, which again I think is quite important, because going back to our first year in practice, we are purely, apart from the lodge project, a conceptual practice where a lot of our work was not realised until year 2. And then we've still seen probably the significant amount of work from year 2 now being realised this year in year 3. So it was about trying to build a built portfolio as quick as possible, which would allow us then to move into new markets. With this, it then also brings me on to Altrincham. So Altrincham Football Club was a result of a phone call while the chairman called the office one day. Fortunate enough to be here to pick up the phone and not travelling down south. And with that, basically, I've always had a passion for football. My actual interest from architecture stemmed from going to football stadiums when I was a young child. So I've always wanted to try and move into this market. So when Altrincham Football Club called us up, for us it was a fantastic opportunity. It all stemmed from a conversation, literally 45 minutes talking about football, the football club's ambition, but also trying to extract quickly what their kind of core values or intent was from the project. And actually the project initially was only to carry out some minor refurbishment works around the ground, that the actual board of directors didn't know what they wanted to focus on. So for me, I saw that as an opportunity of how can we look at a wider vision. So we called this Altrincham 2030, which was basically a 10-year redevelopment strategy of the ground, which would then allow us to take a step back from these ad hoc groundwork improvement kind of works, but then find the larger entity that we want to aim towards with a new board coming on at the football club, and then how we can then focus local projects this year and smaller refurbishment projects towards this wider vision to avoid any abortive work. Now, it might look a bit out there with the roof design, but it's something we've actually worked on in the background with a local structural engineer that we work with at the moment. But for us, it was, like I said, about realising this potential. So that's the grounding at the moment on the left. Consists of kind of a series of small outbuildings, small shacks. There's a community centre at the top left, which is kind of very important to the local area, where all local kind of events happen there, from little kickers who are 3 years old through to kind of just local community chair events. Then there's an existing stand from the early 20th century, so the early 1900s. Timber construction had a series of remedial works in the past, but will soon be needed for refurbishment, which is in our kind of long-term plan. And then you kind of move to the other side, which is kind of the smaller terraces. Now, Altrincham play in the 5th tier of English football, but hopefully from Saturday, they will hopefully get promotion to the National Conference. And with that, it is a small commodity as a football club, but the community is so crucial. So the community do a lot of fundraising for the club. They do a lot of crowdfunding events. They help out with kind of remedial works over the summer months, all to help their local club kind of grow and kind of sustain themselves in this football league. And also, it's a challenging market for them. We've seen lots of clubs like Bury, Macclesfield, Bolton, Wigan. They're all struggling. So Altrincham was, how can we create an economic model which we can grow our architecture with, which will allow us to progress up the leagues. The image on the right is a kind of a typical image around the grounds, and it's something I drew up upon when I first went. And it's, although it's a community-focused club, there is nothing around the club that's basically opening itself out towards the wider audience. I think football clubs in general, I think a lot of older stadiums are still doing that. If you look at kind of or even the new projects that came around, like kind of the early millennium, it's all about these kind of self-enclosed structures. And for me, that's not what architecture is. And with the community potential of Altrincham Football Club, that's why we looked at this wider vision. How could we open this out to different audience? How can we make it that it's not just about match day? How can we make it where we draw upon our involvement with meze, street food, where we maybe look at bringing new street food vendors in, with Altrincham becoming a kind of an up-and-coming town again in the Manchester area. They're generating a lot of new kind of younger audiences with the likes of Altrincham Market. So what we're trying to do is reconnect the stadium back to the town development plan by offering new opportunities to the football club. Again, this was the flat graphic that I mentioned that was carried out by one of our good friends who is a flat graphic artist. But one thing that I thought was important about doing this type of imagery as well is we looked at a wider vision, and it wasn't a fixed idea. So one thing we wanted to do in the next 10 years on this project is bring the community into the heart of the project. So we didn't want to create a series of photorealistic imagery, which would basically, some people's mindsets would be like, well, that's the finished product, and I don't like that. So by creating these kind of free, kind of loose, effectively kind of really nice, fun visual graphics, this provided us the opportunity to actually invite and engage with the community afterwards. So we actually carried these out for we had a fan forum in February where we presented to, I think it was just under 700 Altrincham fans. And what it was basically showing them these and inviting them afterwards to have their say and tell us what's one good thing they love about Altrincham Football Club. Again, user-focused design. So with those flat graphics, we also saw this as an opportunity to obviously understand the users. So we created these 8 different fan profiles, from Freddie, the old Altrincham fan who's been coming to the game for 75 years, through to the away fan, through to kind of new potential VIP and sponsorship that the club are looking for. So what we tried to do was create these fun user profiles and extract their core values, like we mentioned previously, and actually then how can we shape the architecture to cater for all these different individual needs. So therefore making the stadium a 365-day-a-year destination, as opposed to relying on match day revenue, which so many football clubs are still doing. And how can the architecture complement that? So this is so I basically took a step back again after a phone call with the co-chair, and basically outlined kind of 5 key criteria for the works. It was promote external revenue sources, strengthen the relationship with the local community, enhance match day experience, and then future-proof the stadium for any entry to English football leagues and enhance club facilities. So what this kind of resulted in was identifying an architectural approach which looked at a long-term 10-year plan, but basically focused on primary redevelopment at the start, and then hopefully new build elements coming through as the club progresses up the league and becomes more financially stable. During this time, it obviously also provided guidance to the client. How can we look towards this wider initiative? How can we create almost a circular economy where they invest heavily into something now, but then that pays itself back, and then obviously then allows to pay for future architectural projects moving forward. So we saw this as an opportunity of not just doing a big one-off football stadium, but how can this project become a self-sustained phase development over the next 10 years? That's the phase approach we looked at. So we took the 10-year, we took the 5 criteria, and then we broke it down into a series of different years. So this looked at an 8-year scenario on the condition that they basically had back-to-back promotions into the English Football League. So what we're doing this year is focusing on year 1 on the left-hand side, which was refurbishing 2 key entrances to the stadium, some perimeter fencing improvement works, and then also improving the kind of VIP and family sponsorship. So one of the areas at the moment is a key sponsors lounge at the ground. It only has capacity for 30 people at the moment on match day, but what we're looking to do is turn it into a multifunctional space which allows for 80 people on match day, but then also a self-sustained office Monday to Friday, and then a functioning space on other weekends as well. And that's actually due to start on site on Monday. And I'll show you an image of what it looks like in a minute. So what we want to do, again, coming back to actually how we start the practice, and like I said, we took a step back to create this wider vision, put a lot of work in over the initial 8 weeks, but it was also about having our opportunity to break into kind of recreation in a different way, the recreational sector. And one thing we're very heavily focused on is kind of understand the local kind of vernacular that we're designing to. So that image is actually Altrincham Market. What we did when we were analysing Altrincham Football Club and actually the area as well, we identified that Altrincham is quite a Victorian town, so there's a lot of kind of 2-up pitch roof building topologies, be it, you know, kind of 3-4 bed houses through to the kind of more community large buildings. So you've got the existing NatWest Bank in the town, then Altrincham Market, all shares a similar vernacular. And we were saying, how can we adapt this, or how can we take these key principles that have shaped the town so long and actually contribute towards that with the development of Altrincham Football Club. So, and that's where the kind of the roof idea came in. So we took a standard module across kind of a 6-metre structural grid. We took a point on each grid line and we extruded it to similar amounts. So you just create a series of the same triangle, but rotated. And that allowed us to create this unique kind of roof form that we believe will become the identity of Altrincham Football Club moving forward. And then this was a quick flat graphic from the outside. So going back to obviously what we identified about how recreational grounds often don't provide to the local community, we want to completely reverse that in the way that we think as a young practice, and we want to give back to the local community. We want to provide new opportunities to smaller businesses like us. So what we're proposing here is the architecture creates a series of new shop fronts. For example, a bakery that provides for the local community Monday to Friday, but then obviously can then cater for match day gate receipts on a Saturday or a Sunday. A general store again for the local family to go buy their milk. But then up on the first floor as well, it was how can we utilise the height that we've gained from the existing stadium that's there. So the board are very keen to create a series of new facilities for them, but then with new facilities for the football club that's still only part-time, Monday to Friday that will be completely unused. So what we saw as an opportunity is how can we promote these new things such as co-working that are currently coming in. With COVID-19, I think we've also seen that a lot of people might not want to keep travelling into the wider cities, so actually only travel into kind of more local towns that they're involved with. So Altrincham is right on the peripheral of Manchester. So what we thought is if we could provide an architectural model which provides kind of co-working Monday to Friday, and then boardrooms for the directors and match day use for the away team as well, I think it's a kind of a win-win where the architecture can then start generating a circular economy back to the football club. But again, it was looking at kind of local colours. Again, it's a very early stage. We're still developing this over the next 12 months. And we're currently making a full model that you can probably see in the background. I don't think you can actually. But which we will be taking to the football stadium to actually start engaging every other match day with the supporters. So we continue that involvement and start still kind of maintain those strong relationships that we're trying to build as a young practice. Setting the precedent. So this year, like I said, 2 main projects. This is actually a self-build fan zone that we are creating. So I'm actually taking a week off work at the start of September. And what we're doing, we are creating a new supporters area at a underused area of the ground. It's currently used to house the groundworks or the groundsman kind of machinery, and then also a goal at half time. So what we're trying to do is give this area back to the supporters by creating a self-build initiative, which will create a new microbrewery that have been there for 12 months called Libero. It'll be a new street food vendor, and then replace the existing club shop with a new facility. So it's also not only about attracting new audiences, but it's also about respecting the old at the ground by providing this new shop for them, and it's providing a safe place or a sheltered space for them to for supporters to gather. I'll come on to the concept in a second, but one big thing as well with this is with the roof form, it's a self-build modular scheme. It's all based on a scheme, on a module, so that when basically we do future improvement works, we can actually move this or disperse it around the grounds into different key areas as we move forward. So this is what it looks like on a just kind of an early CGI visual. It's a modular self-build project. Again, building to modular is a real advantage because depending on our crowdfunding success, which is going to be launching in the next couple of weeks through corporate SME sponsorship, but also community sponsorship as well, will allow us to know how much we can build this year, and then also an ongoing project moving forward. We've based it on kind of localized footings. So the whole idea is it's very portable. It's almost like a garden shed arrangement, effectively, where you can take this kind of small entity and, like I said, move it around as you need to in the future. One thing that's quite important with this as well, it also becomes a lettable space for the football club. So corporate functions, family functions when the club is not being used on match days. So the actual concept of this is I came up with a concept of a buy a brick campaign. So all the kind of gold, beige colour tiles you'll see are actually going to be on offer to the local supporters and community through our crowdfunding website to basically buy a brick and have their name engraved on the tile. So they have an engraved tile featured on the fan zone. So basically they'll become a part of the new history of Altrincham for 2030. But then it also signs them up to a series of newsletters that we're going to be constantly doing for the next, hopefully, decade, which will basically keep them up to date with all the relevant information that's coming on. So it's about trying to get this community back on the entire kind of journey that we're going through ourselves. The colours, the reds, the different shades of kind of the reds to the yellows, they kind of come back to the Altrincham Football Club kind of logo and the crest. So we're trying to take those kind of ideas on board, which will then hopefully then provoke or kind of prompt different interior projects moving forward as well. So basically this, so watch this space basically. And if you want to become part of it, let me know, and I can send you the link to the crowdfunding. So one thing that Joshua also asked me to pick up on was how are we as a young practice responding to COVID-19? Not just from Altrincham, but also as a practice. I think this made me laugh, to be honest, because I think football's having to adapt to a new light. I think football's having to really understand how they can play with limited crowds, because a lot of the smaller football clubs, as you go down the league, they are so reliant on kind of economic growth and kind of finances coming to the club, and they rely heavily on match day experience. So that's where these kind of new initiatives of a fan zone, increasing kind of new flexible working space on the ground becomes so crucial. So what are we doing? So this is an image of the sponsors lounge that we're trying to refurbish, that we're refurbishing this year. Again, you'll see the reds and the yellows coming, or the golds coming through. We're kind of using robust materials in the back, using black stained plywood. The lighting's actually been changed now to kind of linear strip lighting, but it's all about creating a sense of rules from interior micro scale to kind of macro scale, where we can then take this precedent of localized work and adopt to the wider scheme in the future. And for us, it's about initiating, as a small practice again, our involvement with the football club moving forward. So with the football club on pause, or the football leagues on pause up until last month, all non-league football was cancelled. So what happened to COVID-19? Basically, the football club faced a significant loss in revenue, and therefore all our programs were reconsidered. So initially we were supposed to start this project in May with a contractor lined up. However, since then it's now been kind of rethought. The program's been redone, where actually it's now being carried out by a contractor that's related to the football club. So it's kind of gone around in a full circle where we've had to pretty much re-tender the works because of the financial scrutiny on the football club. We also couldn't do any of the work till this month because of cross-contamination. So with playoff games happening in the ground, this area, the existing sponsors lounge, was actually outlined as their COVID testing area. So we haven't been able to do any work over the summer, which has obviously put the programme back again whilst this was going on. And then also it's prevented our kind of crowdfunding initiative taking place until 2 weeks' time. Because we were supposed to launch it again kind of May, June time, but the football club ran a series of community crowdfunded initiatives to help them basically fund their route through to the playoffs. So what we didn't want to do from our perspective and from the club perspective is rely on the supporters too much. And it was quite interesting. This is where the architecture kind of relates back to the football club and the way the football club operates. So what we're doing now is the crowdfunding for the fan zone is predominantly SME focused, where we're going to small, medium enterprises and larger businesses as well to ask for sponsorship opportunities, but also material donations to help us build this project for the fans. So that was obviously the consequence of Altrincham Football Club, but what was kind of the opportunity that we faced? So we carried out this kind of wider vision, which we've outlined the 10-year plan, but it's about designing for the new norm. I hate the phrase new norm, but I think everyone knows that we're entering that. So how are stadiums going to respond? How are we going to have to maintain social distancing at football grounds, in festivals? Unfortunately, through doing this kind of versatile kind of business model of kind of flexible working areas, flexible kind of eateries, fan zones, hopefully we can provide new revenue streams for the football club, which can then cater for how football's going to change. And then it also allows us, with the redevelopment strategy of 10 years, is actually we're not fixed on something now. It can evolve over time with how restrictions are imposed or how they lift, and how kind of the recreational kind of sector kind of adheres to that, really. Just quickly then, I'm just conscious of time, just about to summarise. So rethinking the studio and helping the wider cause. So as part of lockdown as well, we were quite fortunate. All of our software is cloud-based. So when we came to closing our office, we were actually able to basically just take the machines home and work from home very effectively. Everything, obviously, like I said, is cloud-based software, including our server. We embraced new software, actually. So we actually found we had more client time over the last 3 months than we did probably over the last 12 months with some of our clients, because they've now become kind of used to the Zoom and the Microsoft Teams calls now, but also we've introduced new software called Concept Board. Now, Concept Board, I'm not sure if anyone's tried it, but it's basically a virtual whiteboard where you can invite yourself, your clients, to this kind of open page where you can drag and drop things in, comment on it as you need. And for us, it's been a really useful exercise where it's actually brought clients and ourselves closer together. It also allows you to carry out very infrequent kind of design team meetings or kind of design reviews in the office when we're working apart from each other. For me, it's reduced our journey times and it's actually increased our productivity, I've found. So rather than having to catch up later on at night, actually by carrying on kind of virtual calls, we're now able, and not travel down to kind of Basingstoke and Hampshire as much, we're now able to increase our productivity in the office. And then one thing we did as well, we've got a 3D printer in-house. So I think COVID allowed us as well to just know what we can do to give back. So coming back to all our social values, our community involvement, our user engagement, we carried out the opportunity to provide a series of kind of face masks, kind of printing for the NHS during the first couple of months of kind of the COVID lockdown. So it was great for us to have that opportunity to do that with the technology we have in-house. So just to summarise then, what have I learned? So I didn't want to kind of conclude with, you know, what lessons have I learned? What have we learned from this? And if I can advise anything from, kind of starting in a place where we didn't know anyone, it was kind of, what would I do again? Or how would I do it differently? I think the biggest thing I've taken away from this is about building upon past relationships. My relationship with my past employer of Air Chamberlain Gaunt, again, I couldn't stress enough how important that was and how that's allowed us to be where we are today. I think you've got to don't be afraid to push the boundaries. I think like what we've seen with Altrincham Football Club, it's about that, look further afield. Even if a small residential client just asks for a typical lean-to extension, try and show them what you can offer as a practice, because what are your design values? Because we all know time is important. So look at the wider picture where you can. One thing with COVID that I've said, staying nimble has been key for our kind of growth. Keeping our overheads low as a practice, but knowing who to turn to when you need kind of expertise. If anything, we're probably busier now than we have been probably for 6 months before COVID, which I think is fantastic. And I think it's understand your niche and how you can differentiate yourself from others. There are a lot of architects or a lot of practices out there. It's a very competitive market. But just believe in what you do and have fun. For me, it all comes down to love what you do. I've enjoyed every minute of setting up the practice. It's a new experience every day. I love being involved in design work all the time as well. So I think that's why I still like to be a small practice moving forward. But it's about just knowing your values, having fun, and I think it's and just collaboration. One thing I didn't mention, which I think like architectural societies offer as well, we do a series of kind of practice afternoons once a month, where we actually invite another architecture practice in Manchester to come along, and we just review some schemes on a peer-to-peer basis. And I think coming back to that kind of user group focused kind of communal architectural approach that we do, what we learned in Denmark, I think that is so important, because it's about strengthening our profession together and not just kind of going off on single entities. And I think for me, that's probably the biggest thing that I take away from my 2 years in practice. So thank you very much. That's everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gavin. That was great.
I didn't realise I ran over.
No, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Yeah, I think it's all very informative and all very fascinating to listen to how it's grown and how you've gone from virtually nothing to the point you are now. I think it strikes me you've certainly pushed forward and been proactive, and obviously with all of these things, there's always a certain amount of luck with that's got into it, that you've been able to grab a hold of when necessary and push forward and take advantage of. So I think we've had a few questions come in. Mick, are you there? Are you able to?
Yes, I'm here. I've been kind of keeping track of the Q&A. So I suppose some of these might turn into quite long conversations, I suppose. But just to start with the first question, Gavin, from an anonymous attendee, would it be possible to find out more about the project consultancy role? What did that entail? And was it easy to balance with creating the new practice?
So, in short, the balance was quite difficult. Well, not difficult. I think it just took some time to adjust to, and I think it comes down to that kind of being efficient in what you do. So, fortunately, I've got family down south, so my old practice is now based in London. So, for 3 days a week, I was travelling down to London, but then staying in Oxford and also like Cookham Way near Wickham. So, fortunately, I had that kind of I had that fallback where I didn't have to travel from Manchester to London all the time. I was in the office for 2 days a week in London, then 1 day a week remotely in Manchester. But it was basically, pretty much Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, I was working initially for them, and then dropped down to 2 days a week. So those kind of 9 till 6 there was purely focused on kind of delivering their work there. So I was focused on basically providing a modular housing scheme in Revit for them. So from my experience in Copenhagen, I learned to use Revit. Before that, we were using Vectorworks. So the practice had to make a shift towards Revit. So basically, I was brought on to help train their staff, but then also help deliver the project. I did find that, you know, it was playing catch up, but I think that's probably shows why we only had a certain amount of projects in the first year as well, because it allowed us to find our feet, maintain the kind of quality on those 3 projects that we had, and then the additional leads that came forth with Airchain and Gaunt afterwards. So initially it was quite tough, but then afterwards it kind of eased off. But kind of the involvement was only for 6 to 8 months. So then after that, I knew there was kind of the benchmark or the platform in place to then focus all my energy moving forward as the practice.
Excellent. I definitely admire your bravery taking the leap, because there's probably a lot of people that have had discussions at the pub on a Friday when they've had a hard week and gone, "It'd be so much better if I went alone," you know. But it's making that first step, so it's very admirable of you, to do that. So next question is from our society secretary, actually, Paul McMahon. So I don't know if you can see the Q&A tab there, Gavin, but Paul asks, one reason fees are low is a consequence of a race to the bottom approach, not knowing how else to secure work other than to undercut each other and therefore undermine themselves and the profession. How have you developed your own business skills and make up for the general absence of any business-related training at university or mentorship in practice?
I think that's extremely important, actually. I think the business-related training in architecture is seriously missing. It's really difficult, actually. And I think I was fortunate to do quite a lot of fee proposals when I was in the previous practice. But I think when you're going on your own, like you said, it does feel like at times it is a race to the bottom, especially on some small residential projects where, you know, we've quoted for what we believe in, and then we've been asked to revise our fees, and we've basically gone back to our resource and said simply that's not possible for what we want to do as a practice and how we want to progress. So I do believe there is an element of standing firm. How do we develop our own business skills? It's one thing we do, obviously, with every project we go to, it's effectively showing your worth or showing what you can offer differently. So we use a lot of media, a lot of different mixed media, from 3D models to 3D fly-throughs with projects. And I think it's explaining to the client what they're going to get through you, and it's portraying what you can offer them.
So it's your brand, effectively, isn't it?
It's effectively, yeah, it's building our brand to what we want it to be. And I strongly believe if you undercut your fees all the time, you're not going to be able to do that, because you're not going to be able to progress, because you're going to be bogged down in these smaller projects, and you're not going to be able to provide the quality needed on so many smaller projects to maintain that income. It is frightening, because if you think, you know, you need to generate the work to sustain as the practice. Yeah. And some of it's probably an element of luck as well. I strongly believe Altrincham was an element of luck as well. If I wasn't in the office that day with the phone call, you know, they might have gone to someone else. You just don't know. But I think it's developing business skills. It's almost like building your brand. So we're actually going for a big rebrand at the moment, which is due to launch in a couple of weeks, because we've identified that our brand is still quite junior in the way we're thinking. We're now starting to move into recreation projects. We're starting to move into larger housing projects. So we need a brand now to reflect to people that are not just private residential clients now, but that are also kind of commercial clients. So it's a constantly evolving process. And, you know, going back to the question about undercutting fees, it's something I don't believe in doing. But it's very difficult, because also this year we became VAT registered in year 2. So the first year we could obviously, for the private residential market on kind of extension work, we could always offer quite competitive fees. Yeah. Moving into kind of year 2 and 3, having to obviously say that we've got to put 20% on our fees becomes quite a difficult conversation, actually. And if anything, separates you even further from the smaller entities that you're kind of competing against. But it's just standing firm, and if people believe in your brand and your kind of what you do, and if you can portray how you're going to approach the project, and if it kind of goes with hand in hand with the client's aspirations, then they should pick you. You know, it's not always picking the cheaper option.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I mean, I've worked for a number of practices now. One one which kind of had the gold, silver, and bronze package, and you know that was kind of like pick and choose what you wanted, to one that was almost like, here's your menu. You know, if you go for this, it's this price. If you go for that, it's that, and you know you can chop and change things accordingly. Another question from our secretary Paul. He's obviously, I don't know whether he's thinking of setting up on his own, but we've got a lot of questions there. Approximately, how far ahead in time are existing work banks securing the financial security and stability of the practice? So I suppose this is probably talking about that 18 months period where you were talking about new leads.
Yeah, no, I think so. We've got quite a strong pipeline actually. I think some of the projects we're quite fortunate. I think coming back to COVID as well is we've got a lot of work that's gone into kind of stage 4 this year, which has allowed us to kind of progress quite rapidly during the lockdown stage, where it's obviously projects have already been committed to. We try and build kind of a steady flow of work, but obviously informing clients that we've got kind of there is a process to this, and you know we will be able to fit in here and there, or we're not going to be able to start immediately because we're committed to this. So it's going to be a couple of months, and again, that's holding what a belief what we do. We don't want to exhaust ourselves. We don't want to have to grow too quickly by taking on too much work. So yeah, we've got a healthy pipeline of probably about 18 months to 2 years at the moment, at the rate that we are, as the 3 of us full time with a few external consultants. And for me, it's about, you know, if I can stay as nimble as possible as a practice at the moment, I think that's only going to help that kind of financial security and stability of the practice without exhausting ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that you don't get taught at architecture school, is it? It's the business of architecture. I mean, you mentioned the Business of Architecture podcast. It's a very good resource for that. And I suppose you're not just an architect, you are also a businessman and an entrepreneur. So it's about that balance. And I suppose some practices, they get to a scale and they almost need somebody to just solely do that role.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think it's, I think that business of architecture thing is also quite important. It's about how, like I said, it's not just about running an architecture practice. Seems to have a very different preconception, doesn't it, to running a business. A lot of people, if you undercut fees, how are you successfully running a business? So I do feel a lot of companies, you know, it might sound speaking out of turn, but I do think some people are damaging the architectural profession by offering such low fees.
Yeah.
And that then in turn damages your business moving forward. Because if it's not a profiting business or a profiting architecture business, how can it become a business as opposed to a practice?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably another topic completely, but you do see some practices that are commercial and they kind of just rebadge the same project multiple times to pay the bills, and they take a hit on one. But anyway, moving on to another question from our secretary, Paul. Have the board at Altrincham FC demonstrated a commitment to providing for local enterprises? How will they resist an anchor client such as Greg's or other franchises, which would be out of sync with the values of the proposal, but would provide reliable revenues for the commercial spaces? So
fortunately, the board of Altrincham are very forward thinking, and they completely bought into the vision of what we're trying to do. The vision provided them the opportunity to know who else they could kind of turn to, what future trends. So like I said, the fan zone with the street food vendor, we've already, us personally, have lined up 2 different street food vendors to go in there for the first part of the season on a 6-week basis each. So hopefully that will then gain the momentum to kind of keep that offering going forward. On the wider commercial spaces, we've actually engaged with Trafford Council very early on in the vision, just to show what we'd like to do, and trying to then go back into the kind of wider plan of Altrincham, to hopefully then use that as the leverage of, you know, we need to cater for the wider community, and try and basically use that as a way of kind of persuading the board that that's the right thing to do. And again, I think the community involvement is going to be huge on that. It's by the community voicing their opinions throughout this process, by having this very open dialogue, the board are very willing to listen to what they do. And I think that is probably the community kind of connection is what's going to drive this forward, and is what's going to maintain that quality, and kind of opposing those, like you said, the Gregs, kind of moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, I've personally worked on a similar project, though it hasn't moved forward as quick as this one. And you know, Stadii redevelopment schemes, they're a real good anchor in which to redevelop an area, because they are such a community central building typology. Anyway, I think we've got enough time for maybe 2 more questions, Josh, would you say?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay, so Paul, you've had enough. Ben Price, do you think that the work from home situation has helped you to better embody the sorry, I've forgotten how you pronounce that word in Danish, the hike values, which you have which you have learnt from Scandinavia, and do you think that it has helped you to better value your time?
I completely agree in a way, actually. I think a lot of people have, I think the whole lockdown has allowed people to understand there's better work-life balance to have, rather than working this long-hour culture that the UK has been kind of, not just architecture, but the UK in general. For me, my work-life balance in Denmark, like I said, was amazing. You know, working 8:30 till 3:30 every day, finish at 3 o'clock on a Friday, not allowing to work over a certain amount of overtime a year, and if you did, you had to be given it back because Danish law insists on it. But it's not just kind of the work life, not the hour culture, but also the cycling. So I was cycling to work every day, you know, 14 miles a day, you know, 70 miles a week. It just promotes a really healthy kind of way of life. I think the lockdowns allowed people to realise that they do want to finish at 5 o'clock. You know, they do want to finish at 5:30, 6. We've always encouraged, you know, 5:30 finishes, and if we do need, even as a small practice, when, you know, it's very difficult to finish early, but, you know, we've tried to encourage it as much as we can. There are sometimes we do late nights like everybody, but probably not as much as I thought we would in the first couple of years. It's about efficiency. So I think if everyone can be as efficient as possible in the way they work, and almost having the responsibility of knowing the software that they use as well, because if you know a software program inside out, you can be twice as efficient. And actually, everyone is entitled to a good work-life balance, and I think that Hygge kind of values sits with us quite a lot. I mean, we don't put any lights on in the house as well. It's all candles and lamps these days, which is a key thing about Hygge. So gone from there really.
I mean, having spent quite a bit of time in Scandinavia and Denmark, I went to White Architects offices when I was there, and also Jan Gehl's offices, and just seeing how they work. It's a breath of fresh air, you know, from what we know in the UK. And I always wondered, how can we bring some of that back with us instead of it being like a 45-minute flight away. But yeah, it's obviously a different sort of world out there. But next question.
One thing on that, sorry, as well, is like one thing I learned big time, you know, largely from there, is lunch times, for example. They only have 29-minute lunch breaks over in Denmark, not the hour that we're all used to. But at 12 o'clock or 12:30, whenever we used to stagger it, everyone used to transcend down into the basement and have lunch together. So a big thing in Denmark is communal lunches. And you know, we're so victim in the UK of eating at our desk while still working or reading the AJ, which is great. But actually, when you can take that half an hour to be amongst colleagues and talk and work through things, I think that's invaluable.
It's almost the opposite, isn't it? You're frowned upon if you eat your lunch at your desk.
No, completely true, because everyone is entitled to that lunch break. And I think that's the kind of the efficiency that Danes just having, or the Scandinavians have in general. So in Finland, we're looking at trying a 3-day working week, 20-hour working culture, which they believe they were more efficient than a 40-hour working week.
I have heard that with some practices in the UK, they've gone down to a 4-day week to try it. And, you know, and other practices equally, the one I'm currently at, they have an open leave policy, which has been a very strange thing to me to get my head around, but you can basically take as much holiday as you want. As long as your projects are dealt with. So it's nice to hear that there are different ways of moving forward. I suppose last question from Al Nedic. What are the strategies you did to secure your position in the industry as a new practice during the COVID pandemic?
It's quite difficult because I think we've kind of carried on with what we've done. We've actually gone through one thing like I said, we have got lots of work in stage 4, which is allowing us to kind of sustain what we're doing and not having to rely on new work being generated through the practice. But actually, one thing we did do was see the opportunity to rebrand. So we actually started rebranding at the beginning of lockdown. And I think what that's allowed us to do is spend that time wisely when things are a little bit quieter on in other sectors, and actually work closely and actually see how we can come out of this area, this kind of situation we're in, stronger, and show that we can come out strong. And actually, whilst we're extremely busy at the moment, but that time where the industry feels like it's gone a bit quieter, actually gear things up so when we do come out of it, actually come out of it ready for the next 3 to 5 years. And hopefully that's what our rebrand is going to do for us. So I think it's building on business related items as well as sustain obviously what we're working on at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to change a lot of people's mindsets, as you say. We have got one question left in the Q&A panel. Josh, do we have enough time left for that one?
Yeah, I think if Gavin's got the time, then
is that okay, Gavin? Yeah. No more questions off anyone now. Final question, another anonymous attendee. What other design principles have you learnt from in the past that will be beneficial to you, your clients, and the industry?
I think so. Design principles or ways of working. I think one motto we've always gone with is be early. Be early with everything you do, but be rigorous. 3 words that we go off in the practice are simplicity, rigorous, and crafted. And I think that's what we try and base our design principles on. We always have to try and just keep to current trend, not current trends, because I think everyone has a different way of designing themselves, but I think it's about approaching every project differently, but trying to maintain your strength through your identity. So rather than churning out the same project over and over and over, I think you can see in a lot of our work the same kind of the rigor and the principles and the symmetry and the proportions that we use. And I think it's about identifying yourself within that first year or 2, and then trying to obviously use that as your brand identity, because I think as architects we've got such a big opportunity to be a brand as opposed to being a practice.
Yeah.
And people want to kind of go, enjoy the buildings you're in, enjoy the spaces you're in. And I think design those principles for us is very user focused, and I think I've become more and more user and community focused over the last 2 years.
Excellent. Well, I think that concludes the questions. So Josh, I suppose hand back to you.
Yes. Okay. I think we'll call it there. There's some great questions. Thank you. And thank you for everyone for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed it and found it informative. Hopefully we'll be able to get a copy of this onto the website with a few of the slides, so you can come back and look at it, and I'm sure you'll think of plenty of other questions that will be generated and hopefully trigger some inspiration for your own working practices. So I think it leaves me to just thank Gavin once again for giving up his time to join us. Thank you all for joining us as well, and to Michael for coordinating the Q&A there. And we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, everyone.